Moin, ihr wunderbaren Menschen des Interwebs. Ich begrüße euch ganz herzlich zurück zu meinem Let's Play von The Great Ace-Attorney Chronicles. Wir sind im womöglich letzten Kapitel angelangt und wollen jetzt einmal hören, was Mikotoba zu sagen hat. Und ich habe auch gerade gesehen, Dr. Gory ist ebenfalls anwesend. So, witness, please state your name and occupation for the court. Eugene Mikotoba, lecturer in forensic medicine at the Imperial Yumi University in Tokyo, Japan. And Professor Mikotoba, the young lady beside you is... Oh, this is Dr. Maria Gory, Scotland Yard's practicing coroner, the daughter of Dr. Seif, I understand. Yes, Dr. Seif. I'm afraid I can't tell you why she's here. She's just appeared. You summoned this strange Japanese man as a witness to that autopsy, but you don't summon Mama. That makes no sense. She was there too. That's about the size of it. I've had her eyes boring into the side of my cheek constantly whilst I was in the antechamber too. Poor man, the idea of it's making me shudder. The revelations about Dr. Seif that came to light some days ago defiled the reputation of the entire judiciary. He was therefore deemed unfit to appear as a witness in today's proceedings. The Ministry of Justice's decision on that is final. Well, we wouldn't want any more perjury to be committed, would we? Ministry of Justice? Some questionable strings are being pulled, I think. I remember you, Dr. Mikotoba, but I certainly never expected to be meeting you under these circumstances. Yes, it's been a long while, Lord Strongheart. The prosecution understands that you were a visiting student of forensic science in London until 10 years ago. That's right, I studied under Dr. Wilson at St. Sinners. So you were present at the autopsy of my brother, Lord Clint von Zeeks? I was, yes. I assisted Dr. Wilson with the entire procedure. Mama is far more skilled than any Japanese man. Well, Dr. Wilson asked me to be his primary assistant on that occasion. And this autopsy report was actually penned by you, I believe. Yes, I noted all of the doctor's findings, and when we were done, he read through the document and signed it. Poor Mama, as secondary assistant, she wouldn't have had such a good view of all the innards. So, Professor, do you remember Inspector Gregson? Yes, of course. If it wasn't for his insistence, Lord von Zeek's autopsy would never have happened. But he was absolutely convinced that it would reveal decisive evidence against Genshin, you see. So Lord Strongheart had to entreat the nobility to allow it to take place. Do correct me if I'm wrong, my lord. It was a result of that autopsy that a mass murderer was apprehended and justice was done. But Gregson admitted it before he was killed. He admitted that the results of the autopsy were fabricated. You were there at the time, so you must testify. You have an obligation to tell the truth about what really went on. Absolutely. That's precisely why I'm here. And that's why I'm here too. Very well then, you will give your formal testimony now, witness. But before you begin, a word of warning. You will state truthfully and accurately what you saw and what you heard at the time. I wouldn't dream of doing otherwise, my lord. The moment your testimony verges on supposition, I will expel you from my courtroom. Remember that. Okay, dann bin ich immer hier gespannt, was da jetzt rauskommt. The autopsy of Clint von Zeeks. Okay. From my own observations, I couldn't say there was any indication of the autopsy results having been fabricated. Death resulted from a wound made by a Western-style sword transfixing the hoard that I found a little strange. There were no other signs of internal injury, nothing questionable at all. It was just a beautiful but dangerous piece of evidence removed from the man's stomach. Ja, was für ein Beweis? presumed to have been swallowed by the victim as a way of posthumously identifying his assailant. No indication, nothing to suggest fabrication. Professor Mikatoba, are you certain about that? Well, nothing that I could positively identify as such, much less swear to in testimony. Well, that clears things up nicely. The only fabrication here, Isogi, has come from you. You claim the inspector confessed just before his death, but that is the fabrication. No, he freely acknowledged it, I swear he did. Really, with the tip of a sword at his throat, the man was clearly at his wit's end. The court will give no credence to this confession that was uttered in obvious desperation. Quite simply, there was nothing questionable about the investigation of Lord Tinfonseek's death. And with this testimony we have, without question, uncovered the whole truth of the matter. If I may, my lord, there was most certainly something questionable about it, and the whole truth does rather elude us, I feel. I beg your pardon. Well, you're obviously aware of the facts of the case. All 4 of the professor's previous victims died when an enormous beast was set upon them that ripped out their throats. Such horrifying crimes. But curiously, the killer's last victim, Lord Clint von Zeek, suffered a different fate. Yes, you're right. He was stabbed through the heart with a sword. That's enough. I believe I warned you about this, witness. I promised to curtail your testimony as soon as it entered the realms of supposition or speculation. Very well, my lord. In that case, the defense will pursue a conclusion to this during the cross-examination. I have the right to cross-examine every witness after testimony, and I fully intend to exercise that right. I'm afraid that even the preceding judge has no authority to contravene the letter of the law, as I'm sure every member of the judiciary present in the gallery would agree. Very well, you may begin, counsel. However, the moment your arguments trace from the established facts, I will not hesitate to bring the cross-examination to an end. Proceed with caution. Yes, my lord. Okay. Also es gibt auf jeden Fall einen Satz, den ich gerne angreifen wollen würde. Und zwar, wo Gory gesagt hatte, dass der Beweis aus dem Bauch herausgeholt wurde. It was just a beautiful but dangerous piece of evidence removed from the man's stomach. Und ich würde gerne wissen, was dieses Beweisstück denn war. What exactly was it though? What does beautiful but dangerous mean? Well, it was sparkly and round with a hole, as it might slip over a finger, perhaps. It was a ring, belonging to Genshin Isogi. My father's ring was inside the victim's stomach? At the time, Genshin wore a large ring on the digitus quartus of his left hand, the fourth or ring finger. I would understood it was some sort of keepsake. When my father left Japan for London 16 years ago, I was 8 years old, but I remember that ring. You do? My father's possessions were sent to our family home in Japan after his death, but the ring wasn't among them. Obviously not, it was a key piece of evidence. It remains under lock and key in the stores at Scotland Yard to this day. After the autopsy, Genshin was summoned by the police to check for the presence of his ring. It wasn't on his hand, of course. Moreover, there were deep abrasions on his finger where it had been pulled off. They arrested the man there and then, right before my eyes. How could they? I brought the ring along with me today. What? Here it is, a bit dusty from years in the stores. Oh, gracious, yes, that's it. I haven't seen that in 10 long years. And that was found inside the victim's stomach? Yes, I'm afraid so. You hesitated there, Professor Mekatoba. Should we read something into that? Well, it's just that thinking back now, I didn't actually witness the moment it was extracted from the victim's body. At that precise moment, Dr. Wilson had asked me to fetch him a new scalpel, you see. Dr. Gori, the removal of historic evidence from the stores requires my consent, does it not? However it came to be here, the court cannot deny that this is crucial evidence for today's proceedings. Very well, you may submit it. Okay, Mr. Sogi's ring has been entered into the court record. It's not the sort of ring normally seen in Japan. They almost look like claws protecting the jewel. We must examine it very carefully, Mr. Naruhodo. Very carefully indeed. Okay. Das werde ich jetzt auch mal in Angriff nehmen. Gucken, was der Ring uns zu erzählen hat. These fat claws are doing a good job of protecting the equally fat gemstone in the middle of this ring. Yes, if you were clumsy, you could give yourself a rather nasty cut on them, I should think. Oh, my finger's bleeding. The claws really are sharp. Oh my, that was very quick. Clumsiness, Mr. Naruhodo, even for you. Would make such a dangerous ring. You don't swallow it without doing yourself some fairly serious damage, surely. Thicky mochi bun of about that size would go down much better with some red bean paste in the middle. Someone as clumsy as me would probably manage to choke on it somehow. Okay, also es ist nicht möglich, den Ring zu schlucken, ohne sich selbst dabei zu verletzen. This is a beautiful, dangerous. There were no other signs of internal injury, nothing questionable at all. So, wenn das heißt, wenn er den Ring wirklich verschluckt hätte, hätte er sich Verletzungen entweder im Mundbereich zufügen müssen oder beim Schlucken, also in der Speiseröhre eventuell. Und deswegen würde ich jetzt einfach mal behaupten, dass es eine gute Idee ist, diesen Ring hier vorzuzeigen. The court has heard that the ring was extracted from the victim's stomach, but you didn't actually see it being removed, did you, Professor Mekatoba? That's right, as I said in my testimony before, at that moment I was fetching a replacement scalpel that Dr. Wilson had requested. In other words, you can neither confirm nor deny whether this ring in fact really came from the victim's stomach or not. What are you suggesting, counsel? That the ring was never in the victim's stomach to begin with. It's entirely feasible that Dr. Wilson fabricated that detail about the autopsy. What are you saying? That Dr. Wilson was in possession of the ring in advance after it was somehow stolen from Mr. Isogi. And he produced it during the procedure, pretending to have found it there and then in the victim's stomach. Supposition at best. What possible evidence do you have to support such a rash claim? This evidence right here. That's the autopsy report. It's explicit in that report, counsel. Other than the ring, nothing unusual was noted internally, so I'm not sure how you intend to prove your point. You've already done it for me, my lord. The lack of internal injury says it all. To swallow a ring of this size would require considerable effort and determination, and in addition to its size, there are the sharp claws around the gemstone to contend with. My brother was a determined man, and on the brink of death even more so, I'm sure. He would have stopped at nothing to ensure that evil killer was brought to justice. But if he really had swallowed that enormous ring, it's inconceivable that no traces of its passage down his throat would have remained as internal trauma. There you've arrived at the sticking point. That's precisely why I had my doubts about the findings myself 10 years ago. Why didn't you say something at the time? I did. I still remember the conversation I had with Dr. Wilson in the laboratory that day. Look at this. Now, this is a very curious thing to find in a man's stomach, wouldn't you say? But isn't that rather peculiar, Dr. Wilson? What's that now, Mikotoba? Well, if he swallowed a ring of that size with those sharp metal claws that it has, surely you would expect to see damage to the throat and esophagus, membranes at the very least. Ich kann auch mit eurer Doktorsprache. Dr. Mikotoba, may I remind you that I have vastly more experience than you? I'm terribly sorry. I can think of plenty of ways to explain why no injuries would be seen. No, let's say this. The victim would appear to have ingested the item as evidence to identify his assailant. Go ahead, write it down. So I was right. Dr. Wilson deliberately fabricated the results of the autopsy to implicate my father. I'm disappointed, counsel. That argument is nothing more than speculation. What? Dr. Wilson was Britain's leading authority on forensic science and autopsy work. There is no scientific basis on which to doubt the man's expert opinion. Pardon the interruption, my lord, but damage to the mucous membranes of the throat is easily identified even in living subjects. Using a device called an endoscope recently demonstrated in practical use in France. I want one. The government can pay. I don't think so, and Dr. Gori, rest assured that your removal of evidence from the stores without permission will not go unpunished. We open up the dead to find the truth. I beg your pardon. But Mama, she chose to stitch her corpses up with all her secrets inside. That's wrong. Dr. Gori, it's looking as though she's chosen to walk a different path to her mama. Yes, the ring. What about the ring? I've just remembered something. An earlier incident. What incident? The one I recounted to you before. Of Genjin Asogi saving my life. It was 10 years ago, on a foggy night. Genjin and I were walking down some back streets at late hour. All of a sudden... Don't make a peep, you're coming with us. All of our assailants were armed with pistols, their faces obscured by scarves. The next thing I knew, there was silence all around. Genjin lay on the cobbled street. Blood was seeping from his left hand. He shielded me. It was on the ring finger of his left hand that he used to wear that ring. Are you saying... I've always believed those fucks were after me. But now, starting to question if perhaps I wasn't the intended target after all. Wait, but... Genjin was arrested 2 days after that attack. And in that short interval, the decisive evidence needed to indict him was miraculously found. You mean the ring was stolen from him? You think that's what those fucks were after that night? You pathetic coward. You expect me to believe that you weren't involved? What do you mean by that? It was you, wasn't it? You were the one who took it. You stole my father's ring. You set the whole thing up so you could paint him as a mass murderer and have him arrested. Kazuma, open your eyes. You must know deep down. The truth can be completely obscured even when your judgment is only slightly clouded. But at the moment, you seem to be floundering through a dense fog. Is that why you were so insisted I should be present in this trial, to see you like this? Well, this is an amusing spectacle. What a grandiose expression on your face, as if you were Lady Justice herself. It seems you've softly convinced yourself of this alleged fabrication of the autopsy results, so much so that you're apparently blind to the blatant contradiction that would be born out of it. Though it's extremely hard to believe, let us imagine that there was some misconduct during the autopsy. If that were the case, why would Asogi not have disputed the findings in his trial? In the closed court hearing 10 years ago, the defendant never once denied the claims against him. Isn't that right, Lord von Zieks? Yes, that is indeed correct. Upon hearing the verdict of guilty, he merely closed his eyes, quietly accepting the judgment. The actions of a man who has accepted responsibility for his deeds and his resigned... But then... That is very strange. If Mr. Asogi did nothing to oppose the charges against him, then... That would surely mean there was no fabricated evidence. Nee, ich glaube... Es muss einen Grund geben, dass Asogi dieses Schicksal akzeptiert hat. Also, dass er sich hat freiwillig hinrichten lassen und als Massenmörder hat darstellen lassen. Es muss einen Grund dafür geben. Und ich glaube auch, mich daran erinnern zu haben, dass... Ich weiß nicht, ob das im Gespräch zwischen ihm und Virgil war oder so. Ich glaube, dass Genjin gesagt hat, dass er nur ein einziges Leben genommen hat. Er soll einen Menschen auf dem Gewissen haben. Und es könnte natürlich auch sein, dass er deswegen die Strafe akzeptiert hat. Weil er sich für einen Tod verantwortlich gefühlt hat. Und ich bin mir eben nicht sicher, ob das der Tod von Clint war. Für den er sich dann verantwortlich gefühlt hat. An obvious conclusion at which you should have arrived many minutes ago, Prosecutor Asogi. Your twisted loyalty and clouded judgment are hampering your ability for logical thought. Genjin Asogi's silence at his hearing can mean only one thing. There was no fabrication of evidence during the autopsy of his final victim 10 years ago. But if that autopsy was all above board, there will be nothing to stop Lord Strongheart bringing this trial to an immediate conclusion. Thank you, Ryunosuke. If it wasn't for your frank words just now, this trial may very well have ended prematurely. What's this latest absurdity, Counsel? My lord, your reasoning is perfectly sound, but for one giant hole. I beg your pardon. You claim my father's silence was due to the fact that there was no fabricated evidence, but there is another possible explanation. You overlooked the possibility that he had a reason for maintaining that silence. Silence that would lead to him being convicted and sent to his death. If the autopsy results were an invention, there is no conceivable reason why the man wouldn't have protested. Oh, those results were an invention, alright? There's no question of that. Or are you forgetting that two people with a connection to that autopsy have been assassinated? If I force the grievance I feel from my mind, I start to see you in a very different light. I think perhaps it's you who's been living in delusion these 10 years. Tsuma-sama has created one last chance for us here, Mr. Naruhodo. We can only show there was a reason for his father's silence in his trial. The reason why the man would have said nothing even though he was innocent. Would it have been part of some negotiation, perhaps? Enough rhetoric. The court must be shown evidence. What proof do you have that could possibly explain Asogi's silence in court? Das kann eigentlich nur... das kann eigentlich nur mit dem Gefängnisausbruch zu tun haben. Was anderes würde mir da jetzt nicht einfallen. It's true that Genshin Asogi's silence during his trial resulted in his conviction. But that didn't actually lead to his execution. On the contrary, it led to his escape. An escape that was only possible because he'd been sentenced to death. Although I find it hard to believe my father would have negotiated in that way, the defense is correct. A fake execution, falsification of a death certificate, and a jailbreak inside a coffin. Clearly, such an elaborate plan couldn't have been carried out by my father alone. He must have had the help of a collaborator from the judiciary. I have here the dismissal notice of the chief warder who was working in the prison at the time. The notes read, there are indications that the jailbreak wasn't planning prior to the inmate's incarceration. In other words, there was suggestion of some sort of negotiation between Mr. Asogi and the British government. In exchange for his silence in court, he was given an assurance that he would be broken out of prison. Yes, with that sort of clandestine agreement in place, I can imagine he would have kept very quiet. I would go further than that. In fact, I would say that the elaborate jailbreak of Mr. Asogi can be explained in no other way. First fabricated evidence in our jailbreak conspiracy. Of course, because it's all intimately linked. The prosecution wishes to summon new witnesses to the stand. Witnesses? People who can testify about the jailbreak that took place 10 years ago. Governor Caden and the board chief warder of the prison. I won't allow this trial to turn into a farce to summon the governor of the prison after all these years. Oh, it wouldn't be any trouble, my lord. Father? My dear friend may appear a little rattle-pated at times, but I can assure you he is extremely soulful. He wired both Berkeley and the local prison earlier, asking Governor Caden and Mr. Wajul to attend the Old Bailey as a matter of extreme urgency. Mr. Sholmes did that? Are you telling me that both men are, unless I'm much mistaken, waiting just outside the courtroom at this very moment? My lord, you must permit this trial to proceed as you declared at its outset. You promised that we would stop at nothing to uncover the whole truth behind these disturbing findings. Very well, bring in the witnesses. Make no mistake, I too would like nothing more than to lay this business to rest once and for all. Also ich glaube, okay, also wenn ihm die Freiheit versprochen wurde, ich glaube ja, Dr. Seif hat Genshin dann umgebracht, glaube ich, ne, als er aus seinem Grab wieder herausgestiegen ist. Ich kann mir eben gut vorstellen, dass Strongheart Seif aufgetragen hat, Genshin umzubringen. Und seit diesem Tag hatte er eben Seif mehr oder weniger immer unter Kontrolle, weil er das immer gegen sie verwenden konnte. Also, ich glaube schon immer noch, dass Strongheart eben dieser ganze Strippenzieher dahinter ist. Would the new witnesses state their names and occupations for the court, please? Oi, Barry Caden, Governor of Berkeley Prison. Everyone calls me Gossip. I sell jaunty little tidbit. Your other persona, if you don't mind. Oh, I do beg your pardon, of course. My name is Daily Vigil. I used to be the chief warder at Berkeley Prison. The reason you've been summoned here to court today is to testify about the jailbreak of the so-called professor 10 years ago. The professor, we've already been through all this before a decade ago. The conclusion was that there was anything untoward happened. A convict escaped from your prison, Governor. Hardly what you call nothing untoward. Oh, well. The convict's death certificate was somehow falsified after he was allegedly executed, and he escaped the prison inside his own coffin. A plan of that complexity could never have been carried out without the help of somebody of influence inside the prison. Governor Caden, don't imagine that the passage of time will afford you any protection. If it turns out that you were involved in the plot to break Mr. Isogi out of your prison, then of course, the consequences will be very serious. In all likelihood, a capital punishment. Gods, hold on there, laddie. All I did was... Witness, Governor Caden. Aye, sir. You have a critical role to play in the public safety of our country, a great responsibility to shoulder. The significance of your testimony in court cannot be understood, therefore think carefully before you speak. And Prosecutor Sogi, if you threaten a witness again, you will be held in contempt of court. My apologies, my lord. There's no disputing the fact that an intricate jailbreak plot was enacted 10 years ago. Clearly, you were both involved in some way. So you will testify before the court now and explain exactly what took place. Very well, let the witnesses give their formal testimony. Tell the court everything you know of the plot to break Isogi out of Berkeley 10 years ago. Ja, da hat Mr. Strongheart schon wieder gedroht. Und Caden das Reden verboten. Okay, The Jailbreak Plot, das ist die nächste Zeugenaussage. Und mit der geht es im nächsten Part weiter. Ich bedanke mich ganz herzlich fürs Zusehen, hoffe ihr hattet Spaß und wenn ihr mögt, sehen wir uns sehr, sehr gerne im nächsten Part wieder. Bis dahin, ciao!